Hi, my name is Juliana Sofia Peña, and today I'm going to talk about chapter 12, which focus on input markets. Um, so we're going to focus mostly on labor market and how market structures and real world policies affect outcomes. So, what are input markets? Input markets are where firms purchase the factors of production. These include labor, capital, and raw materials. Just like in product markets, supply and demand determine prices, but instead of determining the price of a good, they determine things like wages for labor or rent for capital. If input prices rise, for example, if wages go up, this increases production costs for firms. As a result, the firm might reduce output or raise prices. So, input markets are directly connected to product markets. Now, here we're gonna talk about labor supply, work versus leisure. So, labor is a special type of input because it's tied to people's preferences between work and leisure. Each person has 24 hours a day and must decide how much time to work versus how much free time to enjoy. At low wages, people may prefer to work less because their value of the leisure time increases, and this creates a backward bending labor supply curve where labor supply increases with wages up to a point and then it starts to fall, as we can see here on the graph. We also have like the utility function formula where CCC is consumption and L is leisure. Here we have labor demand in competitive markets. So from the firm side, labor demand depends on how productive workers are. A firm will hire workers up to the point where the wage it pays equals the value of the marginal product of labor. The value of the marginal product is calculated by multiplying a worker's additional output by the price the firm earns on that output. In competitive labor markets where there are many firms and many workers, wages are determined by supply and demand, and firms are wage takers. So here in this graph shows the labor demand side in a competitive labor market. So the green line is the value, this one is the value of product of labor, which is VMPL, which decreases as more workers are hired because each additional worker adds less extra output. And the red dash line over here is a constant for a competitive firm since it's a wage taker. Now we're going to talk about monopsony and policy interventions. So things change when we move from a competitive market to a monopsony, a market with only one employer, like a single factory in a small town. So in this case, the firm has power and can set lower wages than the value of the worker's contribution. The firm also hires fewer workers than it will hire in a competitive market. So if the government introduces a minimum wage that's higher than the monopsony wage but still below the value of the marginal product, it can actually increase both wages and employment. A monopsonist faces an upward sloping labor supply curve, so hiring more workers raises the wage for all workers. Therefore, the marginal cost of hiring one more worker is greater than the wage. This causes the firm to hire less and pay less than in a competitive market. So on this graph here, the blue line is the labor supply curve showing how wages increase as more workers are hired. And the orange dashed line is the marginal cost of labor, the MCL, which lies above the supply curve because the monopsonists must pay a higher wage to attract additional workers. but this higher wage applies to all workers, raising the cost of labor more steadily. The green line is still the VMPL line. The firm hires workers up to a point where this line equals the MCL, not where the VMPL equals wage, meaning fewer workers are hired and wages are lower compared to a competitive market. This is why monopsonies can lead to inefficiencies and lower employment. Now we have a real world example, which was on the textbook, the Oregon and New Jersey gas station laws. So how labor policy affects input markers, we can see it in this example. So in Oregon and New Jersey, state law bans self-service at gas stations, meaning that customers are not allowed to pump their own gas, like we see here in Florida, for example. So as a result, gas stations are required to hire workers called attendants to do the job. So this is a clear example of policy that increases the demand for labor in one specific industry. More workers are hired, which increases employment and raises total labor income. However, there are trade-offs. Hiring more workers increases operating costs, which leads to higher gas prices, around 5 cents more per gallon, and compared to nearby states like Washington. Also, because of the higher cost, there are fewer gas stations overall. So while the policy creates jobs, it also causes a loss in efficiency and higher prices for consumers. This example shows how the government rules in input markets can have both benefits and costs. A key takeaway from this chapter. So now on this last one, for a conclusion or for a summary, input markets are where firms acquire the resources needed for production, and these markets play a crucial role in determining output and prices in this economy. Also, labor markets in particular depend on both individual choices, like how much to work, and firm decisions, like how many workers to hire. The structure of the market matters a lot. In competitive markets, wages are efficient, but in monopsonies, government policies like a minimum wage can sometimes improve outcomes. And finally, real world examples like Oregon gas stations policies help us understand the trade offs between job creation and efficiency. Thank you.